Thank you so much for coming out today. This is an exciting part of the Job Search and Career series with Pluralsight because it's one of my favorite topics. I think this is one of the most important topics that I could share. And as a matter of fact, when I get on the road and I talk, I do my most popular presentation, which is called Career Management 2.0. Career Management 2.0 is really mostly around networking and branding. And so it's such a critical part of our career. So we're going to talk about personal branding while in transition, but this is stuff that we need to do before we start a job search. Not to say that if we haven't done it that we can't do it. We definitely should do it, during our job search. But if you're not in the job search yet, these are things, tactics, and strategies that you should employ right now. So let's just jump right into the slides and we'll just go through there. First, I'll just do a real quick overview of what these 6 sessions are for the series. And we're on number 2 today. I'll share, like I did yesterday, what the relevant courses are that talk about or touch on personal branding. And then we're going to go into these specific topics. What is your personal brand? Do you even have a personal brand? What are some basic personal branding principles? These are foundational concepts behind personal branding. So when you figure out a personal branding tool or medium or something like that, you want to make sure that you still apply the principles to whatever tool or medium that you're using. And then we'll talk about specific personal branding tools and tactics. And as I was listing through all of my favorite personal branding tools and tactics, I took up a whole page full of notes. And so hopefully we can cover all of them. I don't want to overwhelm you. And I'm not necessarily going to talk about specific branded things, although there will be some things that are that are definitely branded, like LinkedIn. But some of these are just general tools that you can kind of apply anywhere into whatever you're doing. So with that, by the end of today or tomorrow, I'll have the session material posted at jibberjobber.com/PS. The slides and relevant links from yesterday are already posted there. So we'll have that posted hopefully by the end of the day today. By the way, Jibber Jobber is my company. I created it, I conceptualized it, and it's a CRM for job seekers. It replaces the job search spreadsheet. So if you are looking for a way to organize and track your job search, check out jibberjobber.com. All right, so yesterday we talked about interviews in the job search. And honestly, this is my topic that I was probably least excited about out of these 6 topics, but I feel like yesterday was really, really full of good information and great questions. So thank you for the questions. By the way, if you have questions, there is a Q&A on your Zoom interface, and just throw them in there. I'll watch those, and then if there's anything that is relevant at the moment, I'll answer it then. Otherwise, I'll save it for later. Today, we're talking about personal branding. On Monday, next week, we'll talk about job search processes and systems. And when I started my job search, I went and got a newspaper, and I looked at the ads. And this was back in 2006, but even then, that was an outdated thing. And so I started also, of course, on job boards, but what I didn't realize was that the job boards also, how should I say this? It's not a silver bullet. Like, it's not the tactic that I would choose today. And so we'll talk about how to set up processes and systems and make sure you're optimizing your time and doing the best, most high value things as a job seeker. Then we're going to talk about, on next Tuesday, networking, and we'll spend some time on what I call networking on steroids. Or there's no job search or networking silver bullet, but if there were a silver bullet, the closest thing I found to it in my almost 15 years of being in this space is something we'll talk about next week. All right, in 2 weeks, on Monday, we'll talk about onboarding yourself, which is how to make sure that you hit the ground running and you do a great job when you get your new job. And the last week on Tuesday, or the last session, which is Tuesday in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about finances, and we'll talk about finances as a job seeker and things that you need to consider, but also finance principles even after you've landed your job. And I have a great story about somebody I met at a job club. He invited me over to his house for lunch after my presentation. And as we were talking, he talked about his personal finances and the principles he followed so that his job search wasn't painful. And I was really impressed with that because my job search was really painful. It was no fun. So, all right. So here are the relevant Pluralsight courses. And, you know, if there's a perfect match on a Pluralsight course for the sessions that we're doing, this is it. So I want to share some of the table of contents to just show you how in-depth that course is. When I do courses, I like to talk about, you know, what is this and define and help you understand the concepts, and then a lot of tactics. And there are a lot of tactics in this 2-hour course called Developing a Killer Personal Brand. Again, this is all on Pluralsight. Another one is my Career Management 2.0, which again is my favorite presentation when I go on the road. Usually very, very well received. And a big part of this, about 50 minutes, is on personal branding. The third one from me, and then there's 2 that aren't from me, is how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. And of course, your profile is an awesome personal branding tool. That's how we need to look at your LinkedIn profile. It is a tool to share my personal brand. All right, 2 more courses that are relevant from Dan Appelman. This is, I think, the most popular soft skill and career course in the entire Pluralsight library. It has almost 1,400 rankings. It is called Career and Survival Strategies for Technologists. Very popular, very good. I love the way Dan thinks. He's a very systemic thinker, and he approaches his thoughts on careers for technologists in an awesome way. And then finally, from our friends in Australia, Troy and Lars, they have a course called Crafting a Brand for Growth and Prosperity. And these are both 2 people who think very strategically about their brand. So you're going to get like personal branding flavored by Jason Alba today. And I think this would be an excellent complement to what is personal branding and how are other people, especially in the technology space, approaching this. All right, so let me just jump over to the Developing a Killer Personal Brand course. If you're on Pluralsight, just go look for killer or personal or brand, and you'll find it pretty easily. If you're not on Pluralsight, you can get a 10-day trial, which gives you 10 days or up to 200 minutes. This course is 120 minutes. So just with this 1 10-day trial, you can watch my entire course. So I just wanted to show you, I'm logged out here. I wanted to show you how easy it is to find this and then start your 10-day trial. So with that, let me switch over. I'm actually logged in here. And so I just want to go through really quick the table of contents, because as I was going through this as a refresher this morning, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and we can't get to it all in the little bit of time that we have today. So I just want to run through this real quick. So what and how a personal branding introduction, identifying your current personal brand, which is really important. Do you want to be a thought leader, subject matter expert? Can people even find you? We talk about niches. We talk about personal branding influencers and people who have a voice in the personal branding space. We talk about income security, which is a phrase that I use instead of, remember this from the 1900s, job security. So I have a lot of thoughts about income security. Talk about how much it would cost to develop your brand, which really it doesn't cost anything, although you can spend money if you want to. We talk about what a strategy would look like, and the 360 review, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's one of my favorite tools to for your personal brand. All right, so with tactics, I talk about 3 personal branding rules. Once again, these are principle-based things that apply no matter what tools you're talking about. Talk about your tagline, your 30-second pitch, branded business cards, social networking, images, right? The picture that you put in your social space, getting recommendations on your LinkedIn profile. So you can see there's a lot of stuff that we're talking about. And then down at the very bottom, the last module, I talk about specific examples. So here's an example from someone who had a great tagline. Here's an example from someone who had good pictures or bad pictures, blogging examples and stuff like that. So definitely a course that I encourage you to check out. All right, so with that, let's jump into the first topic, which is, do you have a personal brand? So when I'm on stage and I'm doing my career management 2.0 presentation, I'll say, okay, who here has a brand? Who here has a personal brand? And I'll get maybe, out of 100 people, I'll get maybe 10 or so people that have a personal brand, or at least they raise their hand. And I'll say, okay, so what's your personal brand? And so I want you to think about that right now. If you have a personal brand, what is it? How would you describe your personal brand? And so people, it's funny because I'll ask that question and people raise their hand, say they have a personal brand. And then I'll say, what's your personal brand? And then they kind of freeze, right? They're like, I'm not really quite sure. It reminds me of when I had to do my first job search in 2006, like my first forced job search in 2006. And so I created my resume, which was 1 or 2 pages. I had a 1 and a 2 page resume because you had people who were saying, can't be longer than 1, definitely could be longer than 1. So I had 1 of each. And so I was looking at my resume and I was like, this is not the entirety of me. And this is not really fully descriptive of my message. Like there's more that I want to tell you. And of course, I have the opportunity to tell you more in a cover letter or in an interview or my LinkedIn profile or whatever. But it was really frustrating to think that I was going to be judged on whether I could or should go into an interview, if I'd be invited into an interview based on this 1 or 2 page resume or CV. And it was just so frustrating to think that. And so when I ask people in the audience, do you have a personal brand? I think a lot of people are like, well, yeah, this is my brand, but I'm not sure if I want to tell more. Because there is more, and we're so multifaceted, right? There's so much interesting stuff about us. And so anyways, it was hard for people. And so I said, who doesn't have a personal brand? Who in this room doesn't have a personal brand? And of course, everybody else should have raised their hand because they didn't raise their hand when asked if they did. But there was about 5 or 10 people, maybe 20 people who would raise their hand and say, I don't have a brand. I definitely don't have a brand. And I thought that was interesting and fun because what I said, and I got this question, this is such a cool question. I got this question from a podcast that I was listening to for parenting. I think it was the only podcast for parenting that I've ever listened to in my entire life. But for whatever reason, I listened to it. It was entertaining. And I got this really cool idea. It was a question that said, so going to the parenting, if your kids did something, the question is, let's say they like something. Do you like that? And they're like, I don't know. Well, if you did know, would you like it? Right. And so the question that I had was, okay, you don't have a personal brand, but if you did have a personal brand, what would it be? And I loved this question. And it's interesting because every time I asked that question, almost every time I asked that question, people who said they didn't have a personal brand would describe what their brand would be better than the people who did say they had a personal brand, right? And here's my point. The point that I was driving at was that everybody has a personal brand. Everybody. Some people have an intentional brand that they've created and it's on purpose, and they've guided what their brand is. They've guided how other people perceive them. By the way, that's the definition of your brand, how other people perceive you. It's not how you want them to perceive you. It's how they actually perceive you. Okay. And so you could try and brand yourself a certain way, And if they perceive you that way, then great, you've done a great job. But if they perceive you differently, then you haven't communicated what you want them, how you want them to perceive you properly. All right, so my point is everybody has a personal brand. It's either on purpose or it's unintentional, right? And so what I want you to do is I want you to create a brand that is on purpose. Every single person that's on this webinar right now has a brand because people perceive you a certain way. There are people, I wrote down some of the characteristics. So there are people that I have met in my career who have been mean to work with, right? I don't like working with them because they're mean. Lazy. Can you think of anyone that you've worked with that's lazy or worked around? Or people say they're lazy? People that are sloppy, whether that's their desk or their work. People that are disrespectful, right? They're kind of embarrassing to take into meetings because you're not sure if they're going to be disrespectful to others. People that are, I don't know how else to say this, so I said player. People that are players, they just kind of mess around with people, right? So these are unintentional brands that people have. Does that impact them in the workforce? Absolutely. Absolutely. There are people that are creating teams or figuring out who they want on their team for, project work or whatever. And they're thinking, I really like that what that person could bring to the table, but they're kind of sloppy or they're not fun to work with, right? So this is having a direct impact on our brand. I want to get over the unintentional negative parts of our personal brand and create positive and on purpose characteristics of our personal brand. So here are some of the things that I want you to think about when it comes to on purpose and positive. Thought leader. Do you want to be a thought leader? And actually, let me kind of bundle these two ideas together, even though they really are different. Thought leader on the one hand and subject matter expert on the other hand. Could be one and the same. I've been called a subject matter expert and a thought leader, okay? But sometimes you might just say, I don't want to be a thought leader, like that futurist look over the horizon, but I definitely want to be known as a subject matter expert, right? And it could be a subject matter expert in your technology. It could be a subject matter expert in a field. For example, I worked at a company that was hiring payroll specialists. It was a software company that created software for HR, and they were looking for payroll specialists. And what I found out, just kind of watching on the fringe of what was going on with the recruiters was it's hard to find payroll specialists, right? So now we're not just a subject matter expert in a certain technology or in our title, for example, project manager, product manager, developer, something like that. It's also subject matter expert in the field. Let me just address a couple of points or one point that's come in through the Q&A. Somebody said, with all the death and violence in the world, is killer really the best way to describe something? Absolutely not. No. I mean, this course was created years and years ago. And back in that time, it was pretty popular to talk about a killer this or a killer brand or killer idea or something like that. And so, no, it's definitely not the best way to describe something. So my apologies about that, but that's just what it was titled years and years ago. Okay, so thought leader, subject matter expert, team player. You can do things to help people think of you as a team player. Smart, a learner, as I talked about yesterday in our interview session. One of the things that we want people to know, especially in technology, we want people to know that we learn and that we're learners, right? A producer or a finisher. I actually was talking to a guy one day and he said, I was at a picnic thing and my wife was there and I was talking to this guy who was telling me about all these books that he wanted to write, and I had just written my first or second book. And then my wife was talking to his wife separately. And then my wife and I chatted later on and she said, yeah, so his wife said, how do you make Jason finish his books? Like, how do you get Jason to finish his projects? And how'd you get him to launch Jibber Jobber? And how'd you get him to actually get on the road and speak? And it was like, my wife was like, I didn't get him to do anything. So what I got from her comment was that her husband had a lot of great ideas, but never really finished anything, right? And the last job that I took a couple of years ago, I was hired specifically because I was a finisher, right? And I didn't know this at the time, but the person who I worked for, the vice president who hired me, was great at ideas, but he wasn't the finisher. He could have been the finisher, but he had so many ideas and so many plates that he was spinning and so many things going on. He needed a finisher, and he saw all the things that I accomplished. So that's part of my personal brand. And I'm not saying that being a finisher is better than being an idea person, because it depends on the role and the company and the needs and all that stuff and what you want, right? But what I want you to think about is, how do I intentionally make finisher or idea person or whatever it is a part of my brand? All right, so that is, do you have a personal brand? Let's jump over to the personal branding principles. Okay, so the first principle of personal branding is that we all judge. We all make judgments. And I've talked to people who are like, I don't judge, and I don't discriminate, and I don't stereotype. But the reality is we do. We think about things and we connect things with them, right? So let me tell you a quick story about one of my favorite examples of how to overcome personal branding. This just came up in the question from Chuck about how to counter ageism. Okay, so this is my favorite example of somebody I met who was countering ageism. So it was a guy named Mike in Texas, and really nice guy. And he was old, and he had white hair. He didn't just have gray hair; he had white hair, and he looked old and all that stuff. And so an old person in technology, you know, this is around the time when Web 2.0 was all the buzz. And, you know, if you were going to change the world, you probably didn't have white hair and come from Fortran. You know what I mean? And so as we were talking about this, and I saw this play out with Mike, we were talking about intentional career management and intentional branding. And he had a blog, and he was blogging about some really cool stuff. He was actually blogging about very progressive technology. So Mike was a CIO. That's what he was, and that's what he wanted to become when he was in transition. So he was working on a CIO role. And what he found was people were looking for CIOs that, you know, they understood really big business and really big systems and big architecture and all that stuff. But they also needed somebody who understood web and everything that comes around web, which is a ton of different stuff. And it's different to run a business with web than it is to run on an AS400, right? And there are privacy issues and security issues and marketing issues, and there's all these things. And so Mike said, you know, people would look at him and they're like, there's no way that this old guy knows about this stuff. And if you looked at his resume, you would see that it was pretty awesome, but it's questionable whether he could actually move a company as a CIO into the new Web 2.0 world, right? So he used his blog as a personal branding tool. This was so brilliant. And what he did, and I alluded to this idea yesterday of your breadth and your depth, right? This is your wholeness, your knowledge, your passions, your expertise, your exposure and experience. And so, you know, he could talk about big systems and architecture and vision and leading people, and those were all cool things. But if a company was looking for newer thinking, right, which had to do with web technologies and web security and some of those other things I talked about, that's, you know, here's where Mike was stereotypically. But what he did was he used his blog as a tool to start increasing the breadth of his subject matter expertise, I should say. He was increasing the breadth from, yes, I do all this stuff, I've been doing this for decades, and I have a vision and an understanding of how this new thing fits in, and this new model, and e-commerce, and all these things. So he used his blog as a tool to expand his breadth, and then he could go in any topic and blog about, I had an experience here, or I saw this, and here's my opinion about it. I read this article, and here's what I think is right or wrong about it. And through his blog, he could start to expand the breadth and depth of his knowledge. Okay, so when we talk about tools, I'm going to talk about blogging. The problem is blogging scares a lot of people. So I have a backup plan to not worrying about a blog, which I think is pretty cool. But I will say that blogging is the best branding and networking tool that I've done since I started my own company in 2006, with one exception, and that was writing my first book. All right, so that was Mike, and he used his blog, and people, they look at his resume and like, okay, what does this guy really know? And then they went over and looked at his blog, and they're like, oh, wow, he's really up on all this current stuff that we didn't expect him to be up on, and he was conquering age discrimination. I thought it was a brilliant tactic. Take that to the next level. He started writing for Forbes, which is kind of an invite only. Like, you can pitch them, and you can. Somebody on this webinar right now could be a Forbes writer, or could approach them and become a Forbes writer. But he started doing that and got a really big audience, and he destroyed his own biases that he was getting about age discrimination, and he landed an awesome CIO role at, I think, a Fortune 100 organization. So can we counter the discrimination, the ageism, all those things? Yes, we can. Not with everybody. There are going to be people that will always have those biases, and we can't get around them. But in my opinion, I wouldn't want to work for them anyways. If they're going to have those biases, I'm going to move on, because I wouldn't be happy working for them. But for other people who aren't intentionally biased or intentionally prejudiced, they do have judgments going through their mind, and they'll look at you and they'll say, oh, you know what, you're a millennial. Okay, so I'm going to say a few words or phrases or categories, and I want you to just kind of think about what that means. Okay, millennial. When I'm on stage, I typically ask for a millennial or a young volunteer and a baby boomer, and they stand on either side of me, and I ask the audience, tell me about the millennial. And they'll say things like, good with technology, healthy, inexpensive, right, lower salary. And then I'll say, okay, tell me about the baby boomer. And they're like, expensive, higher salary, more healthcare needs. Not good with technology, right? And it's interesting because I've done this around the entire US, and it's almost the same thing every time, the same stereotypes about those people. Well, as we all know, there are younger people who can excel in areas that you don't expect, and there are older people who can excel in areas that you don't expect, but the stereotypes are keeping us down. The personal branding is how we get around it. All right, a couple other things. Programmer. What's a stereotype about a programmer? Well, I remember in school, the joke was, how do you keep a programmer happy? You throw pizza under their door every once in a while, right? So programmers like to work in isolation. They don't have good social skills. They love pizza. I don't know, maybe these were true-ish stereotypes, decades ago. But what I'm looking at now in the world of development and all the people who are coming into development, there is an immense amount of diversity where there are actually extroverts who are programmers. And there are programmers who don't like pizza, right? We need to battle these stereotypes, and we do it through personal branding. Here's another one. What school did you go to? Every area has like this really prestigious school, like a Harvard, Stanford type school, or a not prestigious school, like a community college or something like that. And we are being lumped in unintentionally to these stereotypes. When I asked my boss years ago if the company would pay for my MBA, he said, well, you know what the owner says about MBA, or says MBA stands for? I had no idea. It's like, no, what does he say it stands for? And I already knew the way he said it, that wasn't going to be good. He said, well, you know, the owner had a lot of bad experiences with MBA candidates and MBAs. And so he says that MBA stands for more bad answers. And I was actually in a executive meeting one day, and one of my colleagues who didn't really like me, he was trying to needle his way into my position. And he said, one time we were in a meeting and he said, well, you know, that just sounds like a bunch of MBA speak. And he knew that the chairman of the board disliked MBAs. Like, he was playing into that stereotype. And I was like, what is this? What's going on here? But it was that brand that I was being associated with. Okay, so you've probably met people, work with people, or you are yourself, someone who has a really strong, if I may, foreign accent. I remember I was talking with somebody, I was in Mexico, and I had a friend, and we spoke in Spanish for about a year. Brilliant kid, one of the smartest kids I've ever met. And then one day he started speaking in English to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, that accent does not match what I know you to be. Like that, immediately I started getting stereotypes because of the accent. And I know some of us struggle with listening to or having an accent and having all those stereotypes come in. And once again, the branding technologies and tools and tactics and strategies is how we get over these. Okay, so the next principle that I want to talk about or concept that has to do with personal branding is the hidden job market. This is really important. So if you've heard about the hidden job market but don't understand what it is, I'll give you a scenario. This is really what it is. There's books on this and there's articles and there's videos, but it's really simple. If you've ever been in a meeting, a team meeting, let's say, and the boss comes in and says, hey, I just got approval for 2 more hires. Does anybody in here know somebody who would be really good for these 2 positions? That's the hidden job market. The whole idea behind the hidden job market is it's not publicized for the whole world. So who knows about this? Well, probably HR, some leaders, your entire team, and that's it. It's hidden from the rest of the world. And so what we need to do is we need to, there's 2 questions. We need to be known. Who is it that knows us? Is there anybody in that room that says, oh, I know somebody that would be perfect for this, right? The other thing is, what do they know about us? This goes to how do they perceive us, right? And so let me I didn't make this note later on, so I'll talk about this right now. One of the problems that we have when we communicate our personal brand is that we use jargon. And this is actually one of the principles that I want you to think about. We use jargon and we use cliche because it's easy, it's cute, we can copy it from somebody else. Like jargon and cliche are kind of easy to put into our branding messaging. The problem is jargon is confusing. If I'm not in your industry, it's confusing. Now let's go back to that room of people on your team. We can use jargon with people on our team. That's okay because we all speak the same language. We know the technologies that we're working on. We know the problems and et cetera. And we're using this in a familiar way. But let's take those terms and go to the marketing department and start using that. And we're going to get some deer in the headlights look. We're going to get some marketing people who are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It sounds like a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo to me, right? And so one of the things that I want you to do, this is a personal branding principle. One of the things I want you to do is scratch jargon and scratch cliche from your language, your taglines and how you write about yourself and how you talk about yourself. Scratch the jargon and the cliche to help people outside of your field talk about you better. Okay, so first of all, we're going to help them understand us, because if all I do is talk with jargon, they're going to be like, I don't understand. It's a computer person. And of course, we all know what that means. If you're a computer person, you can program, you can do databases, you can do ACE400, you can do graphics, you can fix my mouse, right? You can fix the printer, right? That's the stereotype of a computer person, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to bucket ourselves into a really big general bucket. We want to help people really understand on a smaller level what we do. And we do that when we strip the jargon and we strip the cliche. I should mention cliche. So jargon is confusing. Cliche is when we say something so much or a super common phrase that doesn't mean anything anymore. Okay, so strip your jargon and strip your cliche. When I want people to know about me and talk about me, I want even non-technologists to understand and be able to talk about what I'm able to do. If I go back to my other notes, producer and finisher, that's not necessarily a technology thing, but they know that I'm going to get projects and products done, right? Even though some people are like, he's a computer guy, but other people are like, yeah, he gets stuff done. That's part of my brand. All right, a couple other concepts is consistency. We need to have consistency in our branding wherever we are, whether it's business cards, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, in person. That needs to be a consistent message. And the other one is frequency. Personal branding is not something that you do once and then you walk away and you've done it and you're fine. Now you can make your LinkedIn profile or your resume and you can walk away from that for a long time and it could be fine. But so I'm not saying you need to go in and tweak it all the time, but there are other things that we do need to consistently do. For example, when I introduce myself with consistent branding, right? I practice it and I use it. I don't just assume that I can do it once and then you've got it and everybody's got it. There's this idea that people need to hear something 7 times before they remember it, before they retain it. All right, one last principle, and then I'm going to jump over to the questions. I'm getting some good questions here and I want to catch up on those. So the last idea that I want to talk about is your niche or niche, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So I've been to a bunch of conferences with career coaches and resume writers, and this is always a big topic. They're like, I can write resumes and coach anybody because it's all principle based, right? But what they've learned and what some of the people who do the niching talk about is when I started niching myself as a CFO resume writer or a CFO coach, I'm not saying I don't want to talk to anybody else, but I attract the CFOs because CFOs are saying, I need someone special that understands my language and my industry and my issues, right? I don't want to go talk to a resume writer or a coach who spends all day long coaching kids that are coming out of college. I want to talk to someone who understands executive level and CFO stuff, right? And so this challenge that we have is we know who we want to attract the most, but if we say that and define our niche, then we're kind of pushing away everybody else. And I'm going to give you 2 ideas. One is that, yes, I think we do attract those right people, and we can actually have a very nice business in our niche, right? But we don't necessarily say no to everybody else. You can say no to everybody else, but the fear is that if we define a niche, that we're going to immediately exclude everybody else. And I find that to not necessarily be true. So it can be true, but generally you're not going to ruin your business by excluding a whole bunch of people, because some people are going to say, hey, I'm not a CFO, but I want to be one in 10 or 20 years. And so you're the person that I need to start working with. All right, so let me jump over to questions real quick. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in. So comment to counteract ageism from Chuck. Be the person who is a constant learner. Absolutely agree. You need to be a constant learner. Everybody needs to be a constant learner, especially if you're in technology. Marry that with the idea of branding. How do we communicate that we're a constant learner, right? What are the things, what are the stories that we could tell in conversation about, oh yeah, and I decided that I was gonna, try and make this thing, but I wanted to make it with these new technologies and just kind of play around with them and see what I know I could do it with this, but I wanted to play around with it here. Or you could use blogs or whatever to do that stuff. So yes, constant learner is part of your brand. The question is, how do you communicate that you're a constant learner? All right, Chuck says, do the terms expert and authority become jargon without a body of proof? This is really an interesting question because about 2008 or so, that's when my first book came out. And this is when everybody was like a ninja or a black belt or a guru. Do you remember this? That there was this few-year period where everybody was some kind of, it wasn't expert or authority. It was like really cool. Like, I'm a ninja. I'm a guru ninja, right? And so it lasted for a little while, and then everybody was like, okay, ninja means nothing and guru means nothing, especially, you know, not to disparage a 17-year-old person, but when 17-year-olds were talking about being a whatever ninja or whatever guru, it's like, you haven't even been alive long enough. Like 17 years isn't enough time to become a guru or a ninja, right? So I'm going to tell you a secret. And this is something that I experienced. It was fascinating. It was interesting. I don't know how I feel about it. I know how I feel about using the idea. So anyways, here's what it is. When I wrote my first book, which I shouldn't have been the person to write it, I could have named by name 24 people who wrote the book. I wrote my book on LinkedIn. I had gone from begging press to cover Jibber Jobber or me or my story, begging and getting no's, to all of a sudden my phone's ringing off the hook and I'm in interviews on TV, radio, podcasts, news, magazines. It was unbelievable because I had a book, right? And the book wasn't that good. There was a lot of mistakes in the book. The title was excellent. So as I've thought about the impact of all of this, let me just make sure I had a note here. Okay, I'm going to talk about this in the tools and tactics section. So when I thought about the impact that writing my book had on my personal brand, what I realized was, first of all, when I'm on stage, I'll ask people, does anybody in here have expertise in something? And a few people raised their hand, like, yeah, I'm an expert in this, or I'm an expert in that. And I said, I would make an argument that everybody in this room has expertise in something, right? You might not be the expert in the industry that's on stage traveling around the world talking about it, but I bet you have expertise in something, right? And so here's what I found. Writing a book, this is my line, so you can write this down if you want to. Writing a book gives you credibility as an expert. Like I said, there were 24 people who should have written the book. They were way more expert than I was on LinkedIn. I was writing the book and learning as I went. These people were consulting and counseling and contracting LinkedIn stuff. They knew it way better than I was. But when I wrote the book, I had been given, it gave me credibility as an expert. Okay, so Chuck says, do the terms expert and authority become jargon without a body of proof? I think there are ways that we can create a body of proof. And it could be a book, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It could be 6 blog posts, really. I mean, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. You don't have to like write a thesis paper on it or anything like that. You don't have to do a PhD on it, but you can still substantiate what your expertise is. All right. Norm from New York City. Norm, hey, great. I'm glad you could make it. Norm and I go way back. What if you pick a personal brand that is too restrictive? Not too many jobs would be available to use those talents. So that's a really good question. Let me tell you another one of my favorite lines that I got from a resume writer. Your resume is not your obituary. Okay, so what that means is a lot of people treat their resume as a backward-facing document. Here's all the stuff that I did in the past. And based on all the stuff I did in the past, you should be able to figure out what I can do for you in this job that I'm interested in, okay? Well, what I realized was if your resume is not an obituary, which is a backward-facing document, it's not a brag sheet, your resume is a marketing document. Your resume needs to be forward-facing. That's why all the experts say customize your resume for the job that you're applying to, okay? You need to match your marketing material with the job that you're applying to. Same answer. You can have a brand that's restrictive, or put another way, that's very niche oriented. But what I want you to do is make sure that however you define it in your niche is forward facing for the job that you're looking for. Okay. So, anyways, that's my answer. I need you to really think about, if it's too restrictive, you're probably not looking forward at the description and the role. You're looking at, here's what I did, and hopefully that will translate into something in the future. Okay, Don says, are getting certifications on LinkedIn enough to show interest in learning and expanding my knowledge? I think that's a really interesting question. I personally, as a hiring manager, I don't think so. I've seen a lot of people on LinkedIn that say, I went through these 7 courses, or some people are like on all the time. They're like, I went through these 70 courses. And I think that it's not telling me anything more than that you have a lot of time to take courses, but how many of you have taken courses on one monitor and been doing something else on another monitor, right? I'm not saying that's what you should do, but I think that's what some people do. And so, Don, here's what I would say. If you want to substantiate that you're actually learning about it, in addition to saying on LinkedIn that you took a course or got a certification or something like that, I would use some of these tools. And I'm gonna make a general bucket for blogging, although there's some backup non-blogging tools. But I'm gonna say blogging to say, hey, I got this certification, here's something I learned, or here was an experience I had. Once again, what I want to do is expand either or my breadth and or my depth. Okay, so with the certifications and the courses and the classes and all that stuff, I want to communicate more than just saying, hey, I got this certification, which, a couple decades ago, there was boot camps for certifications. I remember somebody online said, we hired somebody who had a certification. They went to a week-long boot camp, brought them in. They didn't even know how to turn on the server. And it's like, well, what did you learn in your thing if you don't even know the basics, So what I would say is, how can you communicate and show the breadth and the depth of the things that you've learned? And that's through some of the tools that we're going to talk about. Katie says, is it better to know a little bit of everything or a deeper on one matter? You know what, Katie, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a CIO, then you really do need to know a lot of things, right? You need to have a lot of exposure with vision and strategy and leadership and teamwork and team building and all those things. And you also need to know about technologies that are running your business. And then you need to be able to talk about, know and understand and learn the future technologies. Like, that's a very broad skill set that a CIO should have, right? But if you want to be, I have a friend, Panal, he's an SQL expert. He's a Pluralsight author. He knows SQL and SQL optimization better than anybody that I've ever heard about or known about. And he doesn't really hardly talk about anything else outside of SQL. And that's just what his brand is. And that's the types of clients that he attracts. So I'm going to turn that question back on you, Katie. What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be the executive, or do you want to be like very niche expert? I don't know. And there's nothing wrong with either one of them. I've known people who were niche, went to management, hated it, and then came back to what their expertise was. I'm not sure that there's an expert or that there's a right answer for everybody, but it really depends on where you want to go. So great. Thank you for the question. Katie says, jack of all trades or master of none in your resume. Here's the thing. Once again, the resume is a forward-facing marketing document that you customize for that role. When I was in my job search, I had a general resume, and then when I had a certain job like product manager or business analyst, I would take my general resume, take most of it, and start to customize it for that specific job, and sometimes even for that specific industry, right? Or client base. Okay, Daniel says, Daniel, thank you for your email. By the way, I got it yesterday, and I plan on writing an answer on my blog. Can you explain more in a practical way on how I can make my resume forward facing? It really has to do with less. So here's what it is. You take the job description, and by the way, what I'll do is I'll take about 5 or 10 job descriptions with the same title, just to make sure that, because some of those other job descriptions might have some industry language or jargon, and I want to make sure that I'm using the right language to show I really do have interest, expertise, passion in this particular job. And you might not get that from the job description, but if you get 5 or 10 job descriptions with the same title, I think that you can actually, you can take ideas from different job descriptions to put into your resume. So the answer is, to make it more forward facing, is make sure that you're using the language for the job description, not bragging about what you did in your past, right? I used to work at Taco Bell. It was my first like real job or whatever. I'm pretty sure I don't have that on my LinkedIn profile, but I definitely don't have it in my on my resumes, right? Because it's backward facing. It doesn't matter that I worked at Taco Bell in the 1900s. What does matter are the skills that are needed for this job, and where's my experience that I can directly tie to those skills. Okay, Katie says, I was a hardcore developer years ago, just moved for the business side leading team, and I love it. And I'll tell you what, that's a great transition. I did the same thing. I was a developer, probably not a very good developer, but I moved on to the business side, and my ability to speak technology with my developers and with other developers has been a major asset for me, and I love it also. All right, Maureen says, one-page resume or one-page resume, the way for tech pros. It really depends. What the experts are saying now is it depends on your tenure. If you have a lot of years in the industry, it is totally fine to go over one page. Most resumes that I look at for the jobs I hire for are 2 pages. They're not 1 pages. Like if you're just coming out of school, 1 page, great, go for it. All right, guys, that's it for the questions. For now, I'm going to jump into the tools and tactics, and this is really the meat. This is where we take these ideas and these principles and we apply them. So I talked about the blog, and what I wrote down here, and I said this earlier, my blog, jibberjabber.com/blog, has been an excellent personal branding tool to help share my breadth and depth and my passions and my expertise, my subject matter expertise, my thought leadership. When I pontificate about things that are coming down, right? Then they're like, oh, he's a thought leader because he's talking about something that's in the future that he's predicting. Well, in addition to that, my blog has been the best networking tool that I've ever had, better than LinkedIn, better than face-to-face. My blog and a blog networking strategy has been an amazing networking tool. So I am a blog fanatic, and I will recommend the blog all day long. However, I found that a lot of people don't want to blog because there's a commitment, right? You need to find your technology. Do I go to TypePad or WordPress, or where do I go? Wix, there's all these options that you can go to, and which one's going to be around in 5 or 10 years? And, you know, maybe I'm really hot on it right now and I can write some blog posts right now, but what if in a month or 2 or 5 or 6, I decide not to do it anymore? And then I have this dead blog that I haven't written on for a couple years and I feel guilty about it. And so here are 3 alternatives to a blog that don't have any of those problems, okay? The first one is LinkedIn articles. Easy, super easy. You already have a LinkedIn account. Just go to the top and write an article. And it's like a blog post, really. There's some benefits of that. On one of my LinkedIn courses, I talk about what to do after you write an article and how to write a good article and what makes a good article. So I'm not going to talk about that right now, but LinkedIn is an excellent place for you to start creating that perception of breadth and passion and depth, right? So it's an excellent place and way to do that. If you're really serious about article writing, which I think is a perfect strategy. By the way, let me just say, you can write 6 articles on LinkedIn and call it quits. Like, you can be good with 6 articles. You don't need a lot. And what if nobody reads your blog? Well, that's okay too, because all you really need is that decision maker, that client or the partner or the investor or the hiring manager. You only need that one person who will look at that and say, oh, I didn't realize they had a passion in this area, or they knew about this area or expertise or whatever. That's what we're looking at doing. We're not talking about growing this huge readership. We're talking about creating a personal marketing asset. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 blog posts or LinkedIn articles, that's good enough. I'm not going to come get mad at you and say, hey, it's been a couple years, you should write something else. That really is good enough. A second alternative would be Medium, the website Medium, which is where a lot of people are going to write things like a blog. And then the third, and this is more of a more advanced strategy. It's very similar to what you'll do, but this is approaching an industry magazine or an industry newsletter and writing a guest article for them. The massive benefit that comes with that is they already have a niche audience that's already there. Okay, and so, you know, if you throw something out on LinkedIn, 1 or 2 or 3 people might see it, and there's ways to market that so that you can get more. But if you write an article in an industry newsletter or magazine, that could go out to a lot of the right type of people. Okay, so article writing is, I love it, partially because you can do 1 or 2 or 3 and that's it, and it's no big deal, as opposed to a blog, which I'm a fanatic about blogs, but this is a great alternative. There's websites that you can have like about.me, and some of those websites where it's just like your kind of like your landing page on the internet, and like click here to go to all my other stuff. One thing that I've really seen is that I like is that people will buy their domain, a name like jasonalba.com, and they point it to their LinkedIn profile. So you can use an about.me, which is cool. And there's a whole lot of those that are for free, or just use your LinkedIn profile. Keep it simple. Have one place that has all the cool stuff. You can have portfolios and stuff like that. And then have your name be your domain that points directly to your LinkedIn profile. Another tool that I love is called a 360 review. One of the reasons why I love this is because back in, I think it was 1999, I was a developer for a company, and I was an intranet developer, and I was asked to do by myself, this was my first real big project, a 360 review, to do 360 reviews in the company. So you would have your bosses, your subordinates or people that reported to you, your colleagues, and your peers. So you had this really good assessment of people talking about and giving feedback about a single person. We don't have to get a program to do that. We can actually just send an email to 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 people and say, hey, I'm doing some work on my own personal brand. I just want to understand how you perceive me. Like, what would you say about me? How would you describe me? You have to have thick skin, right? You have to understand that some people are going to be honest or brutally honest with you. But before you send out this question, just realize this is an exercise in getting good feedback about how people perceive you. And it can help you understand how you could take those strengths and the good things and play on those, and then figure out the areas that you want to be perceived differently or better and start working on that strategically. So 360 review is an awesome tool. Talk about that a little bit in my personal branding course. We talked about mini stories yesterday. I absolutely love mini stories. These are, as I mentioned yesterday, they could be used in an interview. You can also use them in LinkedIn. In my LinkedIn profile course, I talked about using mini stories in your summary and each of your, the job descriptions. And it's just a great way to put meat on what your claims are. I'm a team player, for example. Here's a mini story. I have attention to detail. Here's an example, right? So take all your characteristics and start putting stories behind those. Very similar to that is a tagline. So what is your little tiny logo? Some people call it your personal branding bumper sticker. So there's a 30-second pitch, but this is your little tiny bumper sticker. And this tagline would go under your name on your personal, on your LinkedIn profile. Your tagline could go in your email signature. Your tagline could go on your resume or your CV, your cover letter. It can go anywhere and everywhere. When you introduce yourself to people, you can use your tagline as an eensy-weensy part of your introduction. And this is how you're consistently and frequently communicating what your personal brand is. There's the idea of a job search newsletter that I talk about in the job search strategies and tactics course on Pluralsight. I absolutely love the idea of a newsletter. If you go into that course, I'll talk about, I think it's 3 major components of a very short newsletter. It's a very prescribed and very short because you want people to actually read it, and it's very purposeful. It's on purpose, but it's a great personal branding tool. All right, I already mentioned email signature. Let me just finish with this one last one. Go ahead and throw your questions into the Q&A box. And I want to talk about a book. I alluded to this quite a bit earlier. I actually, on YouTube Live or on YouTube on my Jibber Jobber channel, I think it's about a 40-minute video where I talk about how my brand evolved with my books. So my first book was on LinkedIn, and that was actually the reason that I was approached by Pluralsight to do a course. They're like, hey, come do a course on LinkedIn for us. Great. So first of all, my brand started out with Jibber Jobber. So I was kind of entrepreneur. That was part of my brand, but definitely job search space. And then I wrote this book on LinkedIn, which was like, oh, that's job searchy too. So it just really solidified my brand as a job search expert. And then my second book was on Facebook. And I did not expect this to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen, but my brand expanded to being an expert in social marketing. I mean, I'm looking at it now. It's like, well, duh, of course that would happen. But I didn't understand that. Remember I said your book gives you credibility as an expert. I didn't understand that I was going to become an expert in social marketing and get flown around the country talking at social media marketing conferences, right? And getting opportunities to talk about how to do social marketing. My third book was it's called 51 Alternatives to a Real Job, which talks about different revenue streams and ways to create different revenue streams. And I did that one on purpose because a lot of my job seekers on Jibber Jobber want to know, how else can I create income security rather than having just one job? And so this idea of writing books to shift and shape and solidify your brand it was interesting for me to live through it, right? Even though I didn't understand what was happening. So here's what I say. So I go into these presentations and I say, who here has ever wanted to write a book? And honestly, about 3 or 4% of the audience will raise their hands. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to tell everybody else here how to write a book. And I talk about the difference between a regular book and an ebook. And honestly, we can write ebooks. They're not that hard. You've probably downloaded an ebook before that was, 20 pages long? And it was almost double spaced, like 1.5 to 2 spaces. And it had pictures in it, and it had a title page, and it had filler pages on the front and the back, right? It could be a really long blog post. Now, I know that when I say this, sometimes like book nerds are like, I hate this advice because it's almost sacrilegious against what an actual book is. And I recognize that, and I appreciate that. I also recognize that if you are an expert, why not write something that is 20 or 30 pages with pictures and double spaced that talks about your expertise and become credible? Can you imagine if you were in a job interview and they asked you a question and you said something like, hey, this is a really great question. I actually wrote a book on this, and I'll send it to you when I get home. You don't even have to say it's an ebook, or you don't even have to say that you're going to email it to them, but just say that you're going to send it to them. You will stand out more than anybody else because nobody else is going to do or say that, which is pretty awesome. So basically here's the simplest way to do it. Write it in Word or Google Docs or however you write your documents, okay? And then save as a PDF. You can go out to Unsplash or Pexels and grab some royalty-free images. You can make it double spaced. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot to create a personal marketing asset to help solidify your brand, right? I know there are people that might be cringing at this advice, but I'm telling you what, you got to take care of your career. You need to manage your brand. And if you have expertise in an area, why not write a 20-page paper on it and call it an ebook? I give you permission to do that. Okay, let me just go through the questions real quick. Anne says, thank you. Thank you, Anne, for coming. I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me today. Norm says, I think many people have difficulty making it through a typical book. So shorter, more pointed books are probably more likely to be read. And I agree with that. There's some books that I have on my shelf that especially ebooks, I have a hard time going through long ebooks. I actually wrote a 17-page ebook for the company that I've invested in, talking about culture and how to measure culture. And as I got feedback on my ebook, the comments were, yeah, and then there's this idea, and there's this idea, and this idea. And I thought, you know what? The purpose of my book is this. Everything else that you guys are talking about can go into a separate ebook. Instead of making one 40 or 60-page book, I'm going to keep this one less than 20, and I'll write another one that's less than 20. And I think those are going to have a good chance of actually being read. By the way, when I got my first paid speaking gig, which was a fun and interesting story in itself, what I realized is that the people who loved my book, that's what they said, they didn't read my book. They read my title. They read the title. And so what I tell people on stage is nobody's going to read your book anyway, so make sure your title is really good. But having the book with a good descriptive title is a great personal branding strategy. Isn't that weird? I'm not talking about smoke and mirrors. Like, your book should be good and it should be substantial and substantive, right? But don't get upset if nobody reads it. If it gets you into the interview, or it gets you job offers, or it gets you clients or prospects or whatever, and you can feel good about having the book because it is good stuff, it's giving you credibility as an expert, then it's done its job. Okay, Anonymous says, the current president has his job partly because he was better at personal branding than his opponents, despite being less qualified. Is he a good example of personal branding or a bad one? Man, it's almost like that what is that? There's no such thing as bad publicity. He definitely knows how to use personal branding. And there's going to be a gazillion opinions about his brand, but there's no question that he has a brand and he's known. And there are some people that go into the presidential candidacy that, you know, they throw their name in and I'm like, I've never heard of you before. And that wasn't the case with this current president. So I don't know. I really hope that, I mean, I feel like if you're even on this webinar, you're going to do personal branding with good intentions and for good purposes, and that you want to change the world and impact the world, and you want to impact your own career, and you're going to do it in a proper way. But my message that I brought up early on is that you have a brand, right? It's either unintentional or it's intentional. But from now on, from today on, I want you to think, how can I do my brand on purpose? That's what I want you to do, your brand on purpose. Don't just let it happen to you. Don't get grouped in with stereotypes and judgments and categories. I want you to break out of any of those and say, hey, I am an individual. I am an individual contributor and I can do things. And here is my substantiation of my breadth, right? Through mini stories and through taglines and through articles and through all these tactics and techniques. And if you read a few more things, here's how you can see how deep I know and have thought about these things. Okay, so I have thank yous coming in. I don't see any other questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them into the Q&A box. We still have some time. Otherwise, I'll watch for questions. So if there's questions, that's fine. Otherwise, let me just go through the last few slides here real quick. You can go in on any page in Pluralsight and get your 10-day pass, which gives you 200 minutes, which is about a course and a half. Definitely, you can watch the personal branding course, or I think Dan Appelman's is around 210. It's somewhere around there. We have talked about personal branding today. On Monday, we're going to talk about setting up a job search system and process that actually works. And I have a course on that, of course, and I talk about multiple different types of job search systems, because some people need a system because they work all day and they only have a half an hour at night. Other people are in the thick of it and they have all day and they really need something in the next month or two. So we're going to talk about tactics and strategies in the job search that actually work. And then, of course, next week or Tuesday, we'll talk about networking. And then the following week, we'll talk about onboarding yourself and finances. Hope this has been beneficial and fun. I love talking about career stuff. I love thinking about how people pay for their life, how people pay for retirement, how people pay for an enjoyable retirement, right? And a lot of it has to do with what we're doing right now, today, okay? So this is what I want you, this is stuff that really gets me excited. Ann says it's not exactly on topic. It's okay, Ann, because we have time. Do you have any advice on breaking procrastination? So in the course that I'm working on right now, which is, it's not on procrastination or really anything career, it's a soft skill course on increasing your critical observation. I reference the video, I almost said TED Talk. On YouTube, there's a video by Admiral McRaven. I don't know if you've seen that. It was a college commencement speech, and he talks about at the very beginning, make sure that the first thing that you do every morning is to make your bed. And I'm like, yeah, right. Every military person is going to be like, make your bed or shine your shoes or do something like that. But he explains that when you make your bed, it is something that you've accomplished. It's something that you've done. And it's the beginning of accomplishing things throughout the day. Okay. And so if your question is, if your issue is procrastination, what I would say is work on becoming a finisher. And maybe what you need to do is start taking bite-sized things that you finish and creating the muscle of finishing things. And if it just means you make your bed every morning, you're not procrastinating that. If you do just that one little thing, if you do just something and then move on and finish something, you're building the muscles of finishing and doing and creating. And so I think that is something that would help you. I don't know you, and I don't know exactly your procrastination issues. I know I'm a procrastinator, and I work on deadlines, but I get too stressed when I make my own deadlines. So anyways, I have my own procrastination issues. I actually have a course on productivity on Pluralsight. I think it's on, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's something about tasks and productivity or systems and productivity, which will help with procrastination. Dan says, does attending this class count towards course requirements to get the free 30 days on Jibber Jabber? Dan, that's a secret. I don't tell very many people about that. Yeah, if you watch a course, a Jason Alba course on Pluralsight, then I will upgrade you for 3 days on Jibber Jabber, and you can watch as many courses you want, and you can repeat the courses. So yeah, absolutely. Just send me an email, and I'll tell you exactly how to do that. I'm jason@jibberjabber.com. Daniel says, for someone who has worked in different industries, not related to software, how can he build a personal brand in the software industry? This is an excellent question, Daniel. Thank you for asking this. The issue that you're asking about has to do, it's answered with the phrase transferable skills, okay? There are many people over decades that have changed careers. They have changed industries. The way you do that is you figure out what the skills are that are needed in your new field, your new role, your new job, your new industry, and you figure out what skills you can pull from that to tell the story and say, hey, you know what? I recognize that as a software developer, I need to work on a team, or I need to always be learning, or I need to whatever, okay? I need to be able to work on a project really intensely for 4 solid hours and just be really deep on that project without coming up for air. That's who I am. Like I'm known as someone who can concentrate very deeply and master something and focus on it and get it done. or I'm known as somebody who can. So take your experiences, Daniel, from your last jobs and industries and all that stuff, and figure out what those skills are that will transfer over. You have to understand that as a software developer, it's not just, can I program in this language or can I program in these languages? There are a lot of soft skills that will help you land those jobs, okay? And so what you want to do is go back into the soft skills from your past experiences and start bringing those over and saying, yeah, as a software developer, these are the things that I'm bringing to the table. So great question. Jan says, I would like to add a background to my LinkedIn. Is there a company you recommend for free download of pictures? Yep, I mentioned Pexels, which is P-E-X-E-L-S. And I think every single one of those are free, royalty free. And the other one is that I just started using recently is called Unsplash, unsplash.com. So those are the places that I get all of my royalty free images on. And now when I write a post or an article, I'll go grab those images and I put them in. It's also where I got the background image for my LinkedIn and my Twitter pages. Anonymous says, I was trying to write up a thank you for the phone interview email. And before I made an error with the email, instead of I'd like to thank you, it went out like I'd like thank you. He missed the two. Could it cost me the job? Also, is it necessary to talk about why you're a good fit for the job in the thank you email? A lot of sources online say so. You know, on your resume or your CV, you really don't want to have mistakes. That's where you need to do a lot of typo checking, grammar checking. I had a friend who would proofread catalogs. Well, she worked for a store and they had a catalog, I think, once a quarter. And her strategy was to take a ruler, and so she'd stay on one line, right? And then she would read backwards, which I thought was a really intriguing idea for proofreading. So, you know, if you missed it on your resume, I'm not saying it would cost you the job necessarily, but you want to be careful on your resume. In other places, of course, I mean, don't be sloppy. But if you make a mistake, I mean, we're human, right? We're human. So I'm not sure if that would really cost you the job. If you're worried about it, you could write back and say, sorry, I meant to say this, but I left this out. And just make a simple apology. I don't think that's any big deal. The other question, is it necessary to talk about why you're a good fit for the job in the thank you email? Absolutely, right? So there's a concept that I call touch point. Every time we have an interaction, a message, a voicemail, a communication, an email, whatever, I call that a touch point. And I want our touch points to be meaningful, and I want them to be memorable. So a thank you email is a touch point, and it's a really important touch point, right? Because yesterday I talked about that statistic, if you will, 95% of people don't follow up. So if you're one of them that's sending a thank you email, make it meaningful, okay? So I remember, I don't know if any of you have been interviewing all day long. You've interviewed candidates all day long. And by the time you get to the end of the day, you can't remember who's what and who said what and who did what. And you look at the names like, oh, that's the person who wore this, or oh, that's the person who said that, or oh, that's the person with the green resume or whatever, right? So I want you to figure out how you can stand out, okay? And so Anonymous, this is what I would say. Take a relevant, I mean, you could say, here's why I'm a great fit for the job or something like that. But something that would be more meaningful to me as a hiring manager is if you were to say something like, hey, Jason, in the interview, we talked about this one thing, had a good conversation around it, and I had some follow-up thoughts about it, or it made me think about, you know, some stuff. So I wrote an article on LinkedIn about it and link to that, you know, put your follow-up thoughts or put a link to your article, but something that kind of continues that conversation. That's going to show me your interest and your passion and your expertise on whatever that topic was. So that's a really good question. Thank you. Samarth says, Samarth, welcome back. It's good to see you. Hi, Jason. Thanks again for the wonderful session. Can you please reiterate the most important points briefly? For me, it was try to start your blog. So I'm going to say that's not the most important point because it takes a lot of work and a lot of work over time. The most important point for me is to make your brand intentional, okay? So here's a tactic that I'll share with you. We didn't talk about this before, but here's a tactic that I'll share. When I do LinkedIn profile consulting, so I used to get on a webinar and we'd go over your LinkedIn profile and I'd give you advice and stuff like that. So almost every single time I did that to create mini stories, what I would say is, you know, what makes you successful in the role that you're looking for? What are the characteristics that would make somebody successful in this role, okay? And you should be able to brainstorm 10 to 20 of those. Now pick 5 to 10 of those that you really want to talk about and make mini stories out of those, okay? So you're gonna say, you know, to be in this role, I need to be a team player, I need to be strategic, I need to be a good a good leader, I need to have attention to detail. Those are 4 characteristics, okay? So what I would like you to do, Samarth, is to intentionally figure out forward-facing where you want to go and how you want your brand to fit into where you want to go. What are those characteristics? And create stories and experiences and articles around those things. How do I know you're a team player? Well, I can see that you have some articles on it, and I can see on your resume, or I can see in whatever stories you have that you love teamwork and you love leading teams and inspiring teams and working with challenging teams and things like that, right? So what I'd really like you to do is intentionally figure out what you want your brand to be, how you want others to perceive you, and then work backwards from there. The blog posts are a tool. They're just a tool. Same with your LinkedIn profile, just a tool. Dave says, I've had a blog for a couple of years, but I just registered my personalbrand.com. I guess it's okay if I say this, the Dave Carroll with 2 R's and 2 L's, thedavecarroll.com, which forwards to my blog. I think that's great. And so now you have a central place that you can point people to, which is awesome. If you ever decide to retire your blog, then just repoint thedavecarroll.com to your LinkedIn profile, right? Dave says, once you determine your social branding, try to secure it for all social sites you're going to target. Just a pointer. Thanks for the seminar. I agree. I want you to have consistent branding through all of your social sites. And Alan says, thank you for the sessions. First time listening to you, and I really enjoyed your directness. I look forward to the other seminars in this series. Hey, Alan, thank you. I look forward to the other sessions in this series too, and I hope they're good. So, okay, that's all the questions that are in the queue. If there's nothing else, we're going to wrap this up in a minute or so when Pluralsight kicks us off. Frank says, thank you. Guys, I appreciate it. On my third monitor, I have a little an article on Medium that I'm going to read, and it has 114,000 claps. And every time I look over at it, I'm like, oh, they're clapping for me. And then it's like, oh yeah, they're clapping for that article. All right, I don't see any other questions. I'm Jason at jibberjobber.com. Thank you for all the comments and questions that are coming in right now. And that's it. We'll see you guys on Monday. Please share this link out with your friends and colleagues who can use this conversation.